Arctic is a collaboration project involving 6 universities, 4 research institutes and 8 oil companies in Norway. And our aim and goal is to understand the petroleum resources of the Arctic, how to develop the best possible technology that suits the Arctic, which has the least possible environmental impact. The research is mainly divided into 3. So 3 intertwined projects. One is to understand the Arctic.
We're dealing with petroleum geology and exploration of the Barents Sea. Of course, geology is a very crucial and important component. I've been working with several different projects, but particularly I've been focusing on the Paleogene succession that were deposited 60 million years ago in what they call the central basin of Spitsbergen. So I think this basin is a good analog to some of the basins that you find along the western Barents Shelf margin.
Here you can see there's a layer in the rocks that is a bit darker here, and across the fault you see that this block here has gone down on the other side of the fault. Here you have a layer of sediments here that is thicker where the fault has moved down, so you had some space to deposit more sediments.
Of course, when it comes to exploration, having Svalbard as an uplifted part of the subsurface is very important, because then we can use this as an analog to the stratigraphy that the companies are working with in the southern part of the Barents Sea.
The other one is to understand the environmental impact of our activities.
We operate with ecosystem-based management in this region of the world, and that means it's a balance of protecting the environment but also utilizing the resources that exist there. And that is a big challenge, because you have to bring all the stakeholders to the table, you have to communicate the risks, and you have to come up with solutions and manage the future development activities. The final component is a focus on marine mammals, because marine mammals are at the top of the food web in the Arctic. They're very much associated with sea ice, so we have a very strong focus on marine mammals in the program.
Marine ecology is an important part of ArcX, because we want to work sustainable, and we need to understand the ecosystem. In case something happens, then we need to understand which consequences it can have for the ecosystem.
And the third is to develop the best possible eco-friendly technology that is suitable in these vulnerable areas.
We are taking part in other projects that use new technology to collect data and analyze data. So of course that's the link between kind of old school conventional geology.
Well, a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. With 6,000 delegates from 70 different countries, including 500 CEOs and 50 ministers, I think it's fair to say we are all privileged to be a part of this great occasion. It is an honor for me personally to be chairing this session on a very important subject, the industry's response to the Paris Declaration. The World Petroleum Congress has great quantity in numbers, but more importantly, it offers the opportunity for great quality in debate. After Moscow in 2014, our global industry is coming together in another of the world's greatest cities. As has been said, if one had but one single gaze to give the world, one should gaze upon Istanbul. Today, the eyes of the industry will indeed be in Istanbul as we debate this critical topic. And it is a debate that benefits from some long-term perspective. I'm reminded that Steve Jobs said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards." And looking backwards, we can understand what has led to today's discussion. In the last half-century, the global population has more than doubled. Life expectancy has risen from 50 to 70 years. GDP is 30 times more than what it was. and, very importantly, extreme poverty has halved. It is an extraordinary transformation, and it is one in which energy has played a vital role, more than trebling in consumption since 1960. So as our agenda indicates, the task before us is to mitigate the impact of climate change while preserving the benefits of energy in supporting economic development. The Paris Agreement was a landmark agreement in this regard. The task now is to follow words with action, not least in our own industry. We are all aware of that, and we have plans in place, from energy efficiency to investment in low-carbon solutions. So let me provide a frame for our conversation by looking at the contemporary context and identifying 4 forces for change and 4 enablers of progress that can indeed help set the vision of Paris into reality. There should be a slide coming up rather than my face. The first force for change is very apparent here in Istanbul, and it is a dramatic increase in urbanization. Today, more than half of the world's population lives in urban areas, compared to 30% in 1950, and this is set to rise to 70% by 2050. This trend has been positive for employment and living standards, while putting pressure on resources and air quality, to which I will return. Urbanization is one of the major drivers of the second force for change, the continuing rise for demand in energy. BP's energy outlook, and indeed other forecasts, show that energy demand is likely to grow by around 30% over the next 20 years. However, as this chart shows, all but a fraction of the growth comes from non-OECD countries, most notably China and India. The good news is that we are using energy more efficiently, while we expect the world economy will double in the next 2 decades. We expect energy consumption to grow by just 30%, as I said earlier. This compares to 50% in the last 20 years. The third force for change is the continuing challenge of carbon emissions. Again, there is some positive news. BP's Statistical Review of World Energy, which was published last month, shows that the energy-related emissions have essentially been flat over the past 3 years, after growing by around 2.5% per annum over the decade. However, we still have a long way to go to meet the path set out in Paris, which aims to limit the global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius. My fourth and final force for change offers some further cause for optimism. This is the changing pattern of energy supply. BP's Statistical Review, covering 2016, shows that the transition to a low-carbon future is underway, with coal consumption at its lowest level since 2004, while renewables grew by 12%. This rate of growth far exceeds oil and gas, both of which saw growth rates of around 1.5%. We expect the renewables revolution, and I think that's a fair characterization, to continue, with annual growth of around 7% to 2035. However, because renewables are starting from a low base, the current expectation is that their share of total primary energy will increase to around 10% by 2035. Of course, advances in technology and supportive policies may increase that figure. For our part, BP's renewable interests are growing. We have a buoyant biofuels business in Brazil and a very large wind energy business in the United States, with a capacity to generate electricity for around 2.5 million homes, clean power for those homes, which is enough to power Ankara more than twice over. So if these are some of the forces of change, what are the enablers that will progress the objectives from Paris. Let me again suggest four. The first is open and transparent and competitive markets. To have competitive markets, you need 5 factors: infrastructure, innovation, capital markets that lubricate investment, legal clarity, and of course, and very importantly, people. In terms of the energy industry, perhaps the most striking example is shale. There's more shale in China, Argentina, and Algeria than in the United States. Yet it is the United States that has been the witness to and the beneficiary of the shale revolution, which has helped reduce emissions by providing abundant natural gas, which has displaced coal. Why is this? It is because the US offers a fertile combination of those potentially important and supportive factors. To get the most out of resources beneath the ground, you need the right conditions above the ground. The second enabler is natural gas itself. Natural gas is a vital low-carbon energy source. It is abundant and it is affordable. And it produces only half of the carbon of coal when burned for power. It offers a means to lower emissions quickly while renewables achieve scale, as well as a source of backup baseload power to address the intermittency of renewables. It has been calculated that if all coal-fired power stations were switched to state-of-the-art gas-fired plants, we could avoid around 10% of total energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. In BP, we are increasing the share of gas in our production portfolio. Of the 7 major projects that we are bringing on stream this year, 6 will produce gas, including 2 due imminently: Juniper in Trinidad and Tobago and Persephone in Australia. We're also continuing to build the Southern Gas Corridor that will bring gas from the Caspian Sea to Europe for the first time. Turkey will play a pivotal role in this respect as a location for nearly 2,000 kilometers of the pipeline system, and as well as a very important customer of that gas. Gas consumption has increased more than 5-fold over 20 years in Turkey, and amongst other things has helped improve air quality, something that I've been witnessing as a person who lived in Istanbul 20 years ago and as a frequent visitor to this great city. Most of Istanbul is now heated by natural gas, replacing oil and coal. That has cut particulates by half and sulfur dioxide emissions by 90%. More widely, for gas to fully play its role, it is important to minimize methane emissions in the production process. That is why the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, set up by the industry to help tackle climate change, has made reducing such emissions a priority in its billion-dollar program of new investment in low-carbon and low-emission technologies. This takes me to the third enabler, which is technology and innovation. It has been said that a fourth industrial revolution is taking shape, a fusion of the revolutions that were characterized by steam, electricity, and digitization. Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, puts it very well. He says the fourth industrial revolution is characterized by a range of new technologies that are fusing the physical, digital, and biological worlds, impacting all disciplines, economies, and industries, and even challenging ideas about what it means to be human. Something to reflect on. In our own industry, innovation is a game changer. We've seen remarkable falls in the cost of renewable technology, and we have seen technology help to drive the shale revolution. And the digital revolution is now helping us to use energy more efficiently in oil and gas production, with super-fast processing, data lakes, real-time feeds, and predictive software to maximize production and minimize downtime. My final enabler is policy. We saw real momentum in Paris, but more action is needed in terms of policy encouragement for emissions reduction. For a long time, BP has advocated carbon pricing, which brings the power of markets into emissions reductions, making energy efficiency more attractive and lower carbon sources more competitive. We are now helping to advance this aim through our membership of the new Climate Leadership Council. I will conclude with this challenge to anyone who thinks the issue is insoluble. In the US, CO2 emissions from energy have fallen 11% in a decade. In Europe, they've fallen 25% since 1979. And in Sweden, they've actually halved since 1970. So it is possible to both meet energy demand and address climate change. On that positive note, let us now discuss what the future holds. But before that, I'm going to invite my distinguished colleagues on the panel to provide their perspectives before we open up for a question-answer session. And the panel today comprises of Mr. Alparslan Bayraktar, the Deputy Undersecretary for Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources of the Republic of Turkey, Mr. Decio Odore, the General Director of ANP in Brazil, Mr. Bjorn Swedrup, the Senior Vice President of Sustainability for Statoil, and finally Mark Hauschkorn, the Senior Vice President for Strategy and Business Development for Engie ENP. And we'll start with Mr. Bayraktar. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can I also see my slides here? So, first of all, I would like to thank World Energy Council for this invitation, and it is a real honor and privilege for me to be here today, this afternoon, with you. And in my presentation today, at the beginning of this panel, I would like to give you a very brief overview about the Turkish energy market, because as Du said, we need to look back what we have faced last 15 years in Turkey to understand the future and also to see our new energy policy in that directions. So when we look at the last 15 years in Turkish energy market, it was even longer than 15 years. We see two things we can describe Turkish energy market, two main features, at the same time, two major challenges that we are facing. The first thing is, in Turkey, the energy demand is huge, and growing demand is the main feature of this market. And at the same time, as I said earlier, this is a major challenge that we are facing. And the second main feature of the market is import dependency. President Erdogan, just a few minutes ago in his opening speech, also mentioned about this. Unfortunately, Turkey relies on imported resources in terms of primary energy sources, and current estimate is around 70% of resources we are importing. So this is another challenge. On one hand, you have to meet this growing demand. On the other hand, you have to reduce import dependency. And 15 years ago, when we started to, when government decided to set the policy for Turkey, the main objectives set at that time to establish a transparent, competitive energy market to ensure reliable and affordable energy supply to consumers in an environmentally friendly manner. So these are the main objectives of Turkish energy market then and now. But I'm sure you will all agree that today's energy world, supplying reliable energy at affordable cost is becoming increasingly difficult to achieve. There are so many challenges that we are facing. So in that respect, there was a big transformation in Turkish energy market last 15 years. What we have witnessed in Turkey for this market reforms, we started unbundling of market activities, and instead of having vertically integrated state monopoly model into competitive market model, and we privatized all distribution assets in the electricity market, We privatized many generation assets. And during this last 15 years, Turkish energy market attracted $60 billion investments. This is very, very significant, very important figure. But I think more important than this, the whole investment in energy markets over the last decade came from private sectors. That's a very crucial thing because there were no public finance or there were no public entity made this investment. So this is very crucial, and all the private companies, both domestic and foreign investors, made this investment taking all the merchant risk, and what they have done is they believed in the market, the growth, etc. So that was a very big achievement and major accomplishment last 15 years. So $60 billion investment we attracted, and the figures reflected into power generation side, and we see that IPP's role in the market went up to from 25% to 75%. Beginning of 2000s, almost 75% of power generation was coming from state entities. Today is only 25%, and the privatization process is undergoing, and all new investments coming from basically private companies. As you said, this is an important element that to attract investment, you need to have lots of things, innovation, capital markets, etc., etc. But as you said rightly, and I agree with you, that political will and commitment is the major factor to attract investments. And Turkey achieved this with strong political will and commitment to this transformation and market reforms, and we have done this. So this is basically our story about this transformation. When we look at the power market, very briefly, installed capacity went up to from 32 gigawatts to almost 80 gigawatts today, and generation almost 130 terawatt hours to almost 275 terawatt hours. But again, the challenge here, as you see the fuel mix in Turkey in power generation side, we have still rely on heavily natural gas in power market. In 2016, although the figures shows like a 32% of power generation comes from natural gas, this figure some years, like a 2014, 2015, can go up to like almost 48, 50%. And if you imagine, I will show you in a minute another slide that almost 99% of natural gas coming from imported resources. So basically, not only gas market in Turkey, but also power market heavily rely on imported resources in that sense. But one more figure that I want you to focus on here, our story in the domestic coal. When you look at the generation side, 2016, only 16.3% of power generation comes from domestic coal, which is relatively low, pretty low to, if you compare like Germany, if you compare China, even US, coal power generation is almost double than this figure. So this is also another area that we built our new energy policy, which I would like to talk maybe in a Q&A session. And another important figure here in power market, the renewables are growing very significantly. Only last year, Turkey put almost 1,500 megawatt wind power generation into our energy mix, energy portfolio, and wind power generation reached to almost 6,000 megawatt, and we introduced new solar and wind tender as well. And we have targets for wind, solar, geothermal, but maybe we can discuss this in our Q&A session about how we are going to introduce new renewable support mechanisms and how we are going to utilize our renewable resources. Because renewables are quite important for Turkey since we are trying to address import dependency issues. So we need to reduce import dependency utilizing our domestic resources. When it comes to gas market, consumption also in 15 years went from 17 BCM to 46 BCM. And again, part of our air quality concerns, we decided to bring gas, natural gas, to all Turkey, all citizens, and number of customers reached to almost 12.5 million. And today, 78 cities of Turkey, which is out of 81, has natural gas for heating and cooking. So that's the natural gas market figures. And you can see here the years and the consumption and also storage capacity in here. Before I conclude, I would like to give you an overview about our current pipelines and gas infrastructure. As you can see here, Turkey, on one hand, is we have a disadvantage, but on the other hand, we have a lot of advantage because we are at the center of supply and demand, and we can reach to many countries through pipelines to get natural gas. There are ongoing projects also here. You can see one of them is like a Turk Stream. Last year in the World Energy Congress, we signed an intergovernmental agreement with the Russian Federation for Turk Stream project, which is going to basically supply gas to Turkey and through Turkey to Europe. So that's the new project, and we are discussing potential gas from East Med, Israeli offshore gas to Turkey, and again through Turkey to Europe. This is also another project, and we are open to discuss any new projects in this context. We are also heavily investing, I will talk about more on this, we are heavily investing infrastructure, especially FSRUs, LNG terminals, and underground storage facility. Basically, we are witnessing a big paradigm change in gas market, in global arena. LNG is becoming more and more abundant. So we would like to take advantage of this, and that's why we would like to prepare our infrastructures to get this abundant gas resources to Turkey. So that's a brief overview of Turkish energy market, and I would like to discuss more after this session, maybe new energy policy, how we are trying to achieve these old policy goals and objectives, and also I would like to talk about Paris Agreement and Turkey's position. So thank you, and look forward to your questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Shall I get my slides? Okay. They have my colleagues in the panel, everyone in the audience. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I would like to congratulate the organization committee for putting this Congress in place, and thank them for the invitation. We have in front of us, in the decades to come, major transformations. The transition to a low-carbon economy, it's coming, and the Paris Declaration is an important part of this process. We see different situations in different scenarios in different countries. Brazil simultaneously is going through a large transformation, the biggest transformation ever in its oil and gas industry, the largest one in decades. We are reshaping our oil and gas industry, creating opportunities for the development of our very large hydrocarbons resource, but we are also stimulating the production of biofuels in Brazil. We have a very particular situation. We have, in the last decades, advanced in the utilization of biofuels, And we want to take advantage of the infrastructure that we have already built in the country to comply with our commitments with the Paris Declaration. We have one of the cleanest energy matrix in the world, and we want to make it even cleaner. In this presentation, I want to discuss with you our current scenario, our commitments with the Paris Declaration, and what we want to do to contribute to that, and then some final remarks. Brazil energy matrix is clean than most of the countries in the planet. We rely heavily on hydroelectricity and sugarcane and biofuel and biodiesel. We use to have 3 times the average usage of renewables in other countries in the world. When you talk about the vehicles consumption for transportation purpose, we have more than 20% of biofuels, ethanol especially, and biodiesel. We use a mix of 27.5% of ethanol mixed with the gasoline, but we also offer ethanol as a fuel in Brazil in the gas stations. And every gas station in Brazil has an ethanol pump, and we have developed what we call the flex fuel engines, which allow the consumers to select which is the fuel that they were going to put in their cars when they visit a gas station. Ethanol consumption in Brazil has a long history, back to the 70s when we had the first oil shock. And in these graphs, we show the oil price and the ethanol consumption. And we see a correlation between oil price and ethanol consumption. We see a substitution of gasoline, especially by ethanol when oil prices are high. And now we see a challenging times in front of us, because in the past we have always relied on economic incentives for the biofuels production. And now we have in front of us a situation in which not only the economics will be driving the ethanol consumption in Brazil, but also the environmental commitments and this transition to a low-carbon economy. So we see in front of us an era in which we'll have incentives for the ethanol consumption, considering our Paris commitments. And what are those Brazilian Paris Agreement commitments? We have some targets. The targets are until 2025, to reduce by 37% the level of emissions that we had in 2005, and by 2030 to reduce those levels by 43%. We want to do that by expanding the biofuel consumption, by increasing the ethanol supply. We want to more than double the offer of ethanol in Brazil. We now work in about 28 billion liters of ethanol per year, and we should double that to more than 50 to achieve that goal. We want to promote the usage of advanced biofuels and second-generation biofuels. We already have in Brazil a few plants that develop and produce second-generation ethanol. And we also want to increase our share of biodiesel in the diesel mix. This was very important for heavy transportation in Brazil. And by 2030, we want to achieve 45% of renewables in our energy mix. We have a very large consumption of biodiesel and ethanol in Brazil, and as I mentioned, we want to double ethanol consumption by 2030. There is a specific, I will show you later, a specific Brazilian government program which deals with these objectives. Ethanol is very positive for the environment in comparison with the petroleum-based fuels. When we check the carbon footprint on the corn-based ethanol, we see that's 20% less than the carbon print in the gasoline, but when we compare the sugarcane ethanol that we have in Brazil, that most of our production, almost 100% of our production, is based on sugarcane, it's 50% less in terms of carbon print than hydrocarbons fuels. For the biodiesel, we have a mandatory blend on the diesel. It was 5%, and we increased to 8%. Now we have targets to increase it to 10%, and we also developing with the car makers an analysis to allow us to increase this mandatory blend to even above 15%. Those studies are underway currently. We have also worked in the oil and gas industry to reduce the impact in the environment. We have seen in Brazil during the past decades a very strong reduction in gas flaring. We now use more than 95, 96, 97% of our gas, and flaring is very limited. We at the agency, we control that in a very strict way, and we want to reduce it even further. I mentioned about the programs that we have in Brazil to stimulate the decarbonization of our energy matrix, and we have several of them. They are connected, and they are integrated in a way that we intend to use them to help us to fulfill our commitments. And the first and most important one is the RenovaBio program. It's a program aiming to increase the biofuel share in the energy matrix and to reduce the greenhouse emissions. We want to favor producers of biofuels that have lower emissions, like ethanol and even second generation ethanol. That will be done by incentives for the wholesalers to provide fuels with produce less emissions. We have now 21% of our transportation fuels based on biofuels, and we want to increase that share to 24% by the end of the next decade. We also have a program to increase the presence of natural gas in our matrix, because we understand that natural gas will be the transition fuel between the moment we live now, more relying more in oil and carbon and coal, in the transition to a low carbon economy. And this program intends to increase the production and distribution of and consumption of natural gas in Brazil. In connection with that, we have a very large sedimentary area in Brazil. We have opportunities for gas developments. We have been very successful in our exploration offshore, but we want to increase the knowledge of our onshore basins, and then we have a program for reactivation of the onshore operations. And this program is based as well in some prospects for gas development in onshore bases in Brazil, and the aim is to have production of gas inland in Brazil and to increase the presence of natural gas in our energy matrix. In addition, we have some other initiatives like biokerosene. We are at the Petroleum, Natural Gas and Biofuels Agency working to stimulate this usage of biokerosene. We have seen some experiments with the Brazilian airlines already, and we have just a few weeks ago approved the regulations for the usage of biomethane in our distribution system. So now producers that have production from biomethane from landfills and sewage, they can inject this production in the pipelines. So that was what I had for you. I just have some final remarks. We have energy matrix, which is substantially green, but we want to be in the future even greener. Natural gas will play a very important role in this transition, and Brazil is highly committed to increase the presence of renewables in the energy matrix and to fulfill the COP21 goals. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to this panel. While you're pulling up the slides, you could just say climate change is also not only a challenge for us as businesses, but also as us as humans. I was born in 1968, and I'm quite sure I'm not the oldest one in this room. When I was born, you can measure the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. So you measure that by parts per million. When I was born, it was 324 ppm. And we know that the UN, the International Panel on Climate Change, says that we need to keep that concentration in the atmosphere that we're breathing in below 450 ppm. Did you know what it was last year? It was the first year ever that we recorded 400 ppm. So when I was born, it was 324. Last year it was 400, and we know the threshold is 450. So climate, or at least the CO2 concentration, is accumulating, and it's happening for real. And we know, and this is the brutal fact, that 2/3 of those emissions are created by humans, and most of it from the energy system. And we know also that 80% of the energy systems is coming from fossil fuels. So rightly so, when we talk about climate change, we need to talk about the energy systems. So fingers are being pointed at us. So probably we need to help to address this challenge. So that's why I think it's very timely to have an event around how do this industry, these companies, respond to the climate challenge and to the Paris challenge. We believe in Statoil that would need the responsible companies, responsible governments, but also responsible consumers. So what we have done following the Paris Agreement was that we've done a complete work through our business strategy to embed the climate component into the way we run our business. And for those of you who are not familiar with Statoil, we're quite a fairly big oil and gas company, energy company, operating more than 33 countries, including Turkey, I would say. Okay, so we support the Paris Agreement. We have said that we're going to develop our business in support of the Paris Agreement. We work with governments to help shape the energy future. And last year we presented this climate roadmap. And I'm going to share with you the highlights of that climate roadmap now, because we decided let's be very specific, let's be very ambitious and set clear targets on what is it that we as a company would like to contribute with. So the starting point is fairly good. The challenge now is to how could we maintain economic activity with the use of as little CO2 as possible. So we measure very stringently how much CO2 do we use per barrel of oil and gas we produce. So now we're shooting at around 10 kilos CO2 per barrel that we produce, but we said that we're going to move that even further down, despite the fact that it's already around half of what the world average is. We get recognition for that because we disclose and report on CO2 performance. We do that actually as part of our financial reporting every quarter now. That's a new thing for us. And we also see that investors are coming up, and you saw the G20 meeting last week with the disclosure reports on climate risk. So companies are going to be expected to talk more about climate, how they are preparing for that. Our climate roadmap is about three things: reducing your own emissions, growing into new energy solutions, and thirdly, changing how we run a company. So if we're going to talk about the first step, to reduce emissions. So we had detailed out a fairly big set of activities to reduce the emissions from our oil and gas activities, including no flaring, as AMP talked about, new power solutions for when we run oil and gas platforms. Indeed, the biggest one that we're constructing now is going to be run 100% on renewables, hydropower from shore. Last week we issued a tender for new supply vessels, boats supplying our fleet of oil and gas installations, and challenged them, say we would like you to use battery-based solutions and hybrid engines as part of your power systems in boats. So we're trying now to trickle this down all to the 10,000 vendors that we're having as well. Historically, we have been able to reduce emissions quite significantly, and I'm glad to say the first 200 projects we have run all have had a positive net present value to business for us to do that. Okay, now comes grow in renewables. So we said that we're going to shift our capital, new investments going forward towards to increasingly also capture the business opportunities in renewable space. So it's saying that 50 to 20% of investment will be allocated into new energy solutions. And let me share with you just 3 quite interesting examples where we are feeling that we can deploy our existing competence and technologies. The picture you're seeing here is the biggest lifting vessel in the world, the Saipem, lifting on top. This is going to be the first floating wind turbine farm offshore Scotland. Each one of them are nearly the size of the Eiffel Tower, those wind turbines, and will be generating electricity. The 5 turbines will be generating electricity to a city of around 20,000 households and on. We're quite excited about that, and we see that we can use a competence set. We also announced a new carbon capture and storage project this week. We have been doing carbon capture and storage for 20 years now, and we're excited to partner up with new companies and the Norwegian government to do another big carbon capture project with a capacity of potentially 4 million tons over the next years. And finally, today we announced that we are going to do a study together with Gasunie of France, Nuon in the Netherlands, and to study could we replace gas-fired power plants and run them on hydrogen instead. Really exciting, much longer term than solution, but very exciting. That could be significantly contributions to a low carbon future. In Statoil, we believe that low cost and low carbon will be an essential component of building competitive strength. So if you'd like to find more out about what we're doing specifically in our climate roadmap, you can also visit our webpage. But thanks.
Hello, everyone. I take the liberty to take a mic to be able to walk around a little bit, make it hopefully a little more dynamic. But to maybe get you a bit on your toes also, would you agree with me, for a start, that many today are saying that our industry is doomed, a thing of the past, a dinosaur? Have you heard this? A dinosaur? Think about it, and after some of the eloquent introductions from my colleagues on the panel, we may know the secret. Like this famous quote commonly attributed to Charles Darwin. And I propose to further dig into the next 10 minutes and look at some of the good things that our industry is doing to step up and adapt to the challenges of climate change. I like that one. Granted, for many, we are the bad guys. I heard it many times, the Dark Vaders of the energy world. And the climate change and the energy transition is all over. Top-down reports going back 26 Stern Review, and then IPCC numerous reports and the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, and more recently the 2015 Paris Agreement, the COP21, of course. But not only top-down, bottom-up also, of course. For many years, we have a number of activist groups like Greenpeace, Keep It in the Ground, and many others, and now increasingly spreading to public opinion and shareholders and investors alike. It was striking, I was struck a couple of months ago, only at ExxonMobil general meeting, to have shareholders, including largest private equity, BlackRock, and very significant pension fund, CalPERS, voting in favor of ExxonMobil reporting annually on the impact of climate change on their business and how they are going to adapt to a low-carbon future. I was pleased that Bjorn mentioned just 5 minutes back that Statoil is doing it voluntarily, but I understand that shareholders voted against ExxonMobil board. The perception is that climate-related financial disclosure is only going to increase. Somehow, money talks on this already. But, of course, our industry is already adapting in many ways. And again, in the introduction, we got some insightful examples from BP and Statoil, the likes. Take the utilities in Europe, for instance. RWE, E.ON, Engie, my company in France, based in France, but also Dong, Centrica, and many others, all are in the process or have already divested their E&P activity to focus on the energy transition, the decarbonized, decentralized, digitalized energy of tomorrow. But at the same time, opening the way for consolidation of E&P in Europe, and also opening the way for the entry of a number of new players, starting with growing independents, like INEOS, to name one, but there are many others, but also with the entry of private equity funds in different shapes and form. And yeah. But take the majors, and again, Bjorn Otto just mentioned all the good things that Statoil is already putting on the agenda. Many today are already quite advanced at developing their own renewable business. Total also has been investing for many years in solar PV and also battery storage, energy storage. Statoil, we've seen some of the good examples of offshore wind, for instance, which is a very significant part. You mentioned 15 to 20% of your investment, if I recall properly. Total is targeting 20% low carbon business in 2030. So this is quite significant. And today, renewables also offer sometimes an attractive value proposition towards upstream investment. But as uncertain as the pace of energy transition can be, it can also be seen as developing optionality. It's also a way to kind of hedge against the future of upstream business. And also, as I mentioned just a few minutes back, hedge against the increasing sentiment of the investors towards carbon business. But still, there's no question, and Dev Sanyal showed the BP outlook slide as an introduction. There's no question that oil and gas is here to stay for a number of decades still ahead of us. Any projection you look at, from the majors like BP, from IEA, but even from Greenpeace, shows a significant part of fossil fuels in the 2040s, even 2050. There's no doubt about that. Of course, these scenarios may be challenged to model disruptions, or not even mentioning black swans. But even if you look at bold ones, like the Greenpeace revolution, that's the name of the scenario, you still have more than 50% fossil fuels in the 2050s, in the 2040s, yeah. So, in a nutshell, as desirable as it may be, renewable growth is not happening overnight. But our industry is ready to play its part. We've seen already a few examples. Number of players in the industry. BP mentioned just today. Statoil, I'm sure. Total is another one. My company as well are supporting an effective carbon pricing policy as a way to move towards cleaner forms of fuels like gas. This move is already happening. I mean, again, I was struck recently, just a few months back, to see a very large number of coal-fired power plants being cancelled in India and China. More than 100 in China alone. In China as well, in May, just 2 months back, the imports of LNG were up 100% year on year. This is significant moves, and the country, China, is targeting to triple gas supply by 2030. But of course, this is a challenge. I mean, even in spite of all what I just mentioned, I mean, coal-fired power is still growing in Asia because it's available, it's local, it's cheap. Again, a carbon pricing policy is key to make it really happen. As a note, my company, Engie E&P, originates historically from Gaz de France. Some of you may recall this name, and as such, it's obvious, very much a gas DNA. It's today about 2/3 of our production and close to 80% of our reserves. So we are very much gas-oriented. But many players in the industry, and we heard some examples again today, are pushing hard to develop the gas production in their portfolio. Total, again, I think was very proud to announce in 2015 when the first time their gas production exceeded their oil production. No, sorry. Oops, can I go back? Yes. I would like to stop for a second on the catchphrase here. I get the feeling that a number of leaders in our industry, but more generally, a large number of employees in our industry are what I call E&P in their hearts and citizens in their souls. It means we have a passion for this fascinating industry, but at the same time are very much aware of the social responsibility we are having, considering our environmental footprint. And as Bjorn mentioned just a few minutes back, this can drive decisions beyond the pure economic rationale. And I'd like to just give a few examples of projects where my company has been involved, and actually a couple of them with Statoil, actually here. The first one here is Gyoa, and this is a power from shore example. You mentioned it quickly, Bjorn. It's a project that we operate offshore Norway, and we have developed it jointly with Statoil, and we installed power from shore on this facility back in 2010 already. But we've done the same since on other facilities that we operate, like Amstel in the Netherlands and others I could name as well. Carbon capture and storage, CCS. This is an example on a facility we operate offshore the Netherlands called K12B. But we've done also the same on the famous Statoil-operated LNG facility north of Norway, where we are a partner. And on these two facilities, K12B and Snøhvit, we started up CCS in 2004 and 2007, respectively. So already quite some time back. Yeah. And I could name a number of other examples, but then maybe we'll go to some Q&A session. But I'd like to maybe mention that, like many of you probably in this room, players in our industry, but also governments and regulators, but also civil society, we are a member of Climate and Clean Air Coalition, CCAC, for methane emissions, dedicated to monitor and reduce methane emissions on our production and to reduce our footprint as such. So, in a nutshell, considering that oil and gas definitely has a key role to play in the energy transition, and considering all the things that we are doing already, adapting corporate strategy, embracing renewables, promoting gas, promoting carbon pricing, and very mindful of environmental friendly production. We may not be Darth Vaders after all, maybe rather Luke Skywalker. Thank you very much.
Terrific. I promised in my opening comments that you would hear an all-star cast, and I think you have indeed heard an all-star cast on a variety of subjects. I'm not going to try and summarize every single one of those excellent presentations, but I think there are some key features that were discussed. Mr. Bayraktar laid out a thesis around diversification, infrastructure investment, as well as actually the role of the private sector in lubricating investments. Mr. Odone Desio laid out a narrative on renewables, creating an enabling framework, but also the complementarity of gas in that mix. Bjorn Otto laid out, I think, very powerfully perspectives on supply and demand, as well as the importance of targets and targeting outcomes. And finally, Mark, I think, laid out some very important perspectives on portfolio development, on optionality, as well as on the importance of policy. And of course, I started the presentations with a theme around the four forces of change, as well as the four enablers for progress. So one of the things that occurred after the financial crisis of 2008 is that in the London School of Economics, some distinguished financial economists got together and they met with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. This happened a couple of years ago. And they did their learned presentations, and she asked a disarmingly simple question. So how come nobody noticed it? And I think when you look at some of the big challenges that we see, but also some of the opportunities we see around technology, around disruptions that are taking place, the obvious question is, why did we not see, for example, the shale revolution at scale? Why did many people not see the extraordinary developments in solar in terms of the reduction in the cost of manufacture by 99% over the last 50 years? So what is it that actually prevents us from seeing another perspective? And what do we need to do to build some of that muscle? And I'm going to start with the Deputy Undersecretary.
As you said at the beginning, when you opened the panel, we need to look back to better understand what we can achieve in the future and what we can surpass the challenges that we're facing. And what we have witnessed in Turkey over the last 15 years, this market transformation that I mentioned, that the change was inevitable in Turkish market transformation, because what we have witnessed, this system, and still we are facing similar challenges in different aspects, but what we have witnessed, like the old state-owned, vertically integrated model was not working, was not functioning. So the change was inevitable. So we would like to move forward with some solution, with some sort of different approach. And different approach was making a lot of market reforms, promulgating new laws, and including private investments, and to prepare a level playing field for all investors. So, and some of the players, old players, which they were so much enjoying the old type long-term power purchase agreement type of deals and treasury guarantees and everything, they didn't prepare themselves for this new world. You should follow the market dynamics, you should follow the macroeconomic developments, and Turkey witnessed in 2001 one of the biggest financial crises in Turkish history. So some companies missed this opportunity, and some companies prepared themselves or ready to take this new energy world. And as of today, what we are seeing, and in the future, again, the current situation for us, as I started, like an import dependency issue, is, again, it is not a very sustainable thing. So we are trying to address this challenge, and new game changers will arise in this picture. Because what we have witnessed over the last decade, almost $44 billion every single year we are paying for importing primary energy resources. Although last 2 years it was relatively low because of the oil prices and gas prices, still it's very significant, and it is the main cause of our current account deficit. So that's why the new world will be shaped accordingly. But on the other hand, again, the newcomers or the market players should follow very closely developments in the technology side. For instance, and developments also like policy sides. But to be honest, the world needs a lot of investment in technology, a lot of investment in infrastructures to meet the growing demand, security of supply, and also climate change mitigation goals. But the difficulty, and policymakers should provide one thing, is the certainty. But what we are witnessing is in today's world, the only certain thing is uncertainty. And uncertainty in all levels, in all political aspects, like monetary policy, uncertainty, the financial market. So there are so many uncertainties, and our role is to provide the industry to a more foreseeable future so they can prepare themselves. But of course, some will miss the opportunity and some will catch. And who catches the opportunity will rise, I believe. Thank you.
So General Director Adone, you've been through a process of some extraordinary reforms. How does a policymaker think about, how do you think about technology? How do you create, if you will, the factors that take into account the fact that the future is almost unforecastable, as the Deputy Undersecretary said?
That's a very good thing to think about. And the human being is conservative by nature. He doesn't want to move. I'm sitting here, don't want to stand up. It's more comfortable to be sitting. And when you are in a company, in a business, you have your plans, you develop your plans, you convince the others, you convince your bosses, your board members about your plans, and then disruption comes. So it's very difficult for individuals to accept the change, and much more difficult to anticipate the change. In Brazil, we started developing the biofuels. Then we had a very strong push in the biofuels before we discovered very large reserves offshore. Then we focused on the development of the offshore reserves. Now we have the transition to a low carbon economy. We are again simultaneously incentivizing the development of the reserves offshore, but also the biofuels. And what we do at the regulatory body level to stimulate that, we have to give options. We have to leave all alternatives open. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. So we have to issue regulations. We have to give opportunity for the market and for the companies to decide what the future will bring us without signalizing one direction or the other direction. In our country, we have chances for the development of very large oil and gas reserve onshore, shallow water, deep water, very deep, ultra deep water. We have a very large biofuels industry. So what we intend to do is to continue offering all these opportunities for the market, and the market will see, and the market will decide what the energy future will be in Brazil.
Thank you. Bjorn, from a corporate perspective, how do you take this into account, especially as you put targets over the next 2 decades or so?
Yeah, I think this is really the big challenge for any kind of company trying to set a strategy. How do you navigate this uncertainty? Or when we did our strategy work recently, we looked at this and say, okay, beyond the uncertainty, at least for now, we know that technology is really developing quickly, both when it comes to the renewables, but also how we produce oil and gas. Really radical shifts on the cost curve in the shale, for instance. But also how we consume energy, digitalization, sensoring, radical shifts in the marketplace, practically speaking. And then we also see social behavior shifts. A lot of youngsters don't have a car anymore, they don't want to have a car. People living in cities, cities would like to meet their energy needs differently. And then you kind of, at least we come to expect gradual regulatory tightening around our industry. That's just happening because the relationship between man and nature needs to be regulated somehow with 9 billion people on the planet. So yes, there's a lot of uncertainty, but for us, building resilience is a very important part of our response, and also to, as Mr. Odnesson, generate optionality. So, but still moving on in a way. And of course, there are a couple of things when it comes to climate that we know. We know that we need much more renewables. Probably we would need quite a lot more gas. You know, we will still need oil for many years, and we need much, much less coal. Much less coal. And I think we talk too little about that. We need to really drive coal out as quickly as possible.
Mark, you know, your company has gone through a pretty dramatic transformation in terms of portfolio. And that transformation that you've enacted, is that based on effectively a combination of where you see the long-term secular shifts, or is it seen as something around sort of where you want to invest new capability as you look forward? What's driving, what's the thinking behind that big portfolio shift that you've made?
As I mentioned earlier during the speech, I was and I'm still actually part of a major utility in Europe, ENGIE, and as many other utilities, they have decided to divest their E&P activity and focus on this energy transition, not develop optionality like Statoil or Total we mentioned, and probably BP as well, but segregate. And through this divestment, of course, generate proceeds to invest in these renewables, decentralized, digitalized, and so on. This is not exceptional. I named 6 utilities in Europe doing the same. And so this is rather typical for utilities for whom E&P was not the core business, unlike Statoil, unlike Total, and others, right? So clearly, my company today, ENGIE, is projecting its strategy and its vision entirely to this energy transition. When it comes to E&P, this part of the group, we are in the process now of being divested to private equity. You probably have read this in the press, Neptune Energy, backed with Carlyle, CVC, and CIC. So this is now an entire new ball game for us. And of course, growth is back on the agenda because this is the game plan. As I said, you know, it's an entire shift of players in this part of the world, at least. With all the utilities exiting, you have a number of new players coming in, private equities, but also strong independents developing. And it's basically opening the way for consolidation. So this is a different but pure player focus on E&P type of agenda that we'll be having. We will not be developing renewables and the likes because of the sheer size of the business and the dedicated focus we will have on E&P. But just a side comment on your original question. I get the perception that when we project our scenarios, we really have difficulties, it's almost inbuilt difficulties at modeling disruptions and black swans. And we are looking at you know, percentage evolutions of supply and demand and growth and variations of a number of macroeconomic criteria, but disruptions are very much different by nature. And it's very difficult. It calls, I guess, for an entire different approach to scenario planning.
Paul Samuelson, the famous economist, once said, if you forecast, forecast often. And I think what I think all my co-panelists are saying is actually forecasting the future is an impossible task, but retaining nimbleness and flexibility in policy making and business decisions and investments is vital, especially as we look forward. Let me kind of shift gears a bit to the energy mix. We do know that the world today is a world of, in some respects, the haves and the have-nots. There are 1.4 billion people who actually don't have access to primary heat, light, and mobility, things that we can take for granted sitting in the wonderful hall that we are sitting in today. So one of the truisms is we do need to provide energy to people who are underserved, while at the same time, we need to make sure that the mix that we put in place over the next 2 decades and more is actually different from the past. And in that context, when I look at renewables, and if you were on the flight from London last evening, which was delayed, you had lots of time to do reading, I discovered that almost every forecast on the growth of renewables in the last decade has undershot what has actually happened, which is just a data point. And to put in perspective, renewables, we see the next 20 years getting to a 10% market share. It took oil 40 years to go from 0 to 10% market share, and it took gas 50 years to get to a 10% market share. So dealing with, if you will, these twin challenges, I don't think they're actually mutually exclusive. How does one go about it? And I'm going to start again with maybe General Director Odone to provide a perspective from a Brazilian and South American perspective in particular.
Well, the changes are coming fast, and with technology are coming even every day in a faster way. We see that we will have different solutions for different situations. There is a lot of talk about solar, wind, electric cars, electric cells, and I see that the development of these solutions, they will be different in different regions, in different countries. In Brazil, for instance, I see the increase of the users of ethanol and biodiesel because of the infrastructure that we have already in place there, and all the technology and the knowledge we have on this subject. But I see other countries in which they don't have the infrastructure that we already have. We see other types of alternatives growing faster. But we see that we have different solutions for different types of problems.
Deputy Secretary Bayraktar, I mean, you've got some very ambitious plans in terms of renewables mix in the overall portfolio, something like 37.57% by 2023. How do you see it?
Well, when you look at our energy market, as I described at the beginning, the reducing import reliance issue, I think renewable is one of the major resources that we need to utilize more and more. That's for sure, and this is not only for that challenge, but also like climate change mitigation targets. You need to have more renewables in our energy mix. But on the other hand, we should also not to miss one important element, I believe. When this renewable wave started, for instance, like a decade ago in Turkey, we have been criticized a lot. I mean, I was at the time in the regulatory authority. I was a former commissioner in Turkish energy market. And the main critics was like the figures, the feed-in tariff numbers were relatively low in Turkey, and we were not, everybody was saying that we're not going to attract any investors in Turkey because the figures in Europe was much higher than Turkey, and everybody was saying you have huge potential in solar, huge potential in wind, and if you don't give enough
certainty and enough figures that you cannot attract the investors. But in a, to be honest, very short period of time, in a decade, things are changed, and now everybody is kind of complaining. If you ask the industry, I'm sure you have some audience in here, industry, they complain about this feed-in tariff, this renewable support mechanisms, that it gives additional burden to industry, commercial power consumers, and even these today's numbers are very high in terms of like market prices. So in a very short period of time, so as a policymakers or like a regulator, you need to find the right balance. Because, I mean, either you are going to support one industry or one technology, and the first movers, it's going to be first losers, or it's going to be good timing. So this is very critical, and it's very difficult to find the right balance. For instance, in Germany, they have a very successful story about renewables, but every single year, German ratepayers are paying almost 12 to 15 billion euros to just support the renewables, and for maybe 20 years, 2 decades. So you need to find a right balance, and we try to do it in Turkey as well. So recently we introduced a new renewable mechanisms, which is not only attracting investment for power generation, but also we are trying to invite investors to manufacture the equipment, use local content in here. So in that respect, yes, we are replacing fuel with renewable. Instead of having imported coal or gas, we are going to generate power from renewables. But on the other hand, we are not going to also import content or equipment. So we are combining these two systems to create more jobs and give business opportunity to small and medium enterprises as well. So you have to have a more comprehensive policy in that direction, not only focusing on power generation or support one technology or another, but also more comprehensive social aspect of these policy also important. So that was our general approach for our renewable system. Thank you.
Bjorn, you know, the twin challenges of providing access to energy while doing so sustainably is something that you experience in many of the markets you work in, because we work in many of the markets that you work in around the world. How does one deal with some of those challenges?
Could I just first comment to the one on speed on technology? Because I guess all of you remember Steve Jobs going like this. It was only 10 years ago. 10 years he introduced the first iPhone in the world. And now, you know, but I don't think the energy system is going to transform in this way. But of course, parts of the energy system might transform as quickly. But of course, the renewables are mainly about electricity. And electricity is now only 18% of the energy systems. So as citizens, we should all cherish for more electricity, for allow more renewables to grow that. But for the oil and gas business, probably petrochemicals, heavy transport, marine, aviation, you don't see a change coming that quickly there. So it might peak out the oil and gas consumption, but it's going to be, the tail is going to be really sticky, I believe. You know, very difficult to get down. and again, I think electricity and renewables offers very interesting opportunities, for instance, for Africa. When the off-grid solutions for micro solar solutions to provide light and so maybe even some cooling from time to time, a fan or a fridge, and you know, that might help give decent, appropriate ways of living for many, many more people who actually deserve it.
Mark, your thoughts?
Well, in a nutshell, I would start by saying that there is no one-size-fits-all, of course, across the globe. and situations in various countries can vary drastically. If I look, for instance, at the situation in France, where I live, we have a newly elected president and a new government, and the newly appointed Minister for Ecological Transition, that's the exact wording, Nicolas Hulot, just announced this week that he was now going to set to increase by 40% the goal of the carbon tax by 2030. It was 100 euro, and France is already on a roadmap to increasing it. It's today 30, so there is a roadmap to 100, and now it's stepping up to 140 by 2030. Talking about renewables or cleaner forms of fuels in general, I mean, pushing to the right side the energy mix, that's one of the things that, of course, governments can do, under, of course, a very strong pressure from public opinion, increasingly involved in pushing our authorities also to that direction. But back to my first point, I mean, if you consider, for instance, India, I read a calculation a few days ago that if you would just put the ton of CO2 at $50 in India, you would double the price of cement, which is just unacceptable in a fast-growing economy where this is basically a critical commodity. So you cannot address it one way only, of course, across the various situations across the globe. But I think, in a nutshell, in a combination of increasingly active and organized public opinion and well-enlightened authorities, and also very mindful industry players like ours, we are somehow, all moving to the right direction of making the energy mix gradually cleaner. And as Björn said it earlier, please, much less coal.
Thank you. So let's just stay on the subject of policy, and particularly carbon pricing, which has been raised a couple of times, whether it's cap or trade or it's carbon taxation. How does, from your perspective, if I may ask first, Deputy Under Secretary Bayraktar, how do you see carbon pricing in terms of the suite of policy opportunities or policy actions moving forward? Do you see that as being a critical enabler, or is it just another enabler? Or indeed, do you see that as an impediment, as some people see it?
Well, I think, again, it's very similar, or maybe we can make an analogy that we can, when we witness like developments in renewable and support systems in renewables, also it was like, on one hand, as an opportunity, on the other hand, creating risk, some of the areas that I mentioned in earlier conversation. So again, like a carbon pricing or carbon tax in general might create some opportunity, but on the other hand, again, you need to look for, as a policymaker side, you need to look for some other areas that how it will address, how it will affect, and the impact on these carbon pricing on the other areas in the industry, in the consumption and other areas. So you have to find the right balance. And this is reminding me that the Paris Agreement itself has set very important targets, ambitious targets, but also based on very important two principles: common but differentiated responsibilities, as well as respected capabilities. So every country has a different circumstances. So how are you going to apply one, as my colleague said, like a one-size-fits-all type of scheme? If you can apply, if you implement successfully the measurement, there are so many challenges. So if you can't implement successfully, then it's going to create a lot of criticism and a lot of unfair competition. So these are the areas that we need to address, and we need to think very carefully when we design this. For instance, for Paris Agreement, we are having that difficulty as of Turkey, because unfortunately the agreement itself is a very successful one, inclusive, and I think it's a great achievement. But when you look at the annexes, unfortunately, I believe that it's still outdated and it doesn't fit today's facts and realities. So when it comes to implementation of Paris Agreement, it needs to be rethink and smartly think to find a way to make it happen. Otherwise, for instance, for Turkey, the annex mechanisms and beginning of 1990s world and today's world is different. So we would like to reach financial instruments of the Paris Agreement and also technology transfer, because we believe if we reach those opportunities and those mechanisms, we can make contribution more and more. That's how we see it. So it's a very difficult task ahead of us, but work on it, I believe, worth it. Thank you.
And of course, Turkey has a 21% INDC reduction in terms of emissions versus 2012 up to 2030. So the question that you're raising is one of not the aspiration, much more around the execution. How does one go about it? And so in that similar vein, General Director Odone, I mean, how do you see it from a Brazilian perspective, the implementation as well as the issue of policy mechanisms like carbon pricing?
Oh, years ago, we used to discuss the peak oil. Then at that time, we had economic incentives for the renewables. Pricing was enough to incentivize the consumption of renewables. And we expected the oil reserves to diminish in the future, the oil price to increase. Then there was a concern on economic growth in the long run because of the increase in oil price. This is not the world we live anymore. We have the shale, we have abundant reserves, and now we have the climate change discussions. And now I believe we have space for other types of incentives for the renewables. And I think that there is a space for carbon tax, a space for mandates, the way we are discussing mandates in Brazil in this RenovaBio program I just showed in the presentation. So I believe that the governments will set the rules, they will set the expectations. We as regulators will regulate, and the market will bring the solutions following the political decisions.
The point on peak oil is very well made. We estimate in BP that currently there are 7 trillion barrels of proven reserves, which is double the demand over the next 50 years. So it's a significant amount of proven reserves that are out there. The question, of course, is going to be which of those reserves get monetized based on a number of factors, including, of course, the cost.
Now we discuss peak demand, and technology will increase oil recovery. So new reserves will be appearing, and then space for this type of discussion.
Mark, from your vantage point, how important is carbon pricing to changing the narrative? And do you see, more particularly, moves in terms of a global pricing mechanism, or do you see regional blocks developing these mechanisms?
Yeah, as I said, sorry, as I mentioned earlier, I really do not see a general approach because specific situations in countries from one to the other may require a dedicated analysis and a dedicated policy. There are already several dozens of countries across the world who are experiencing in different shapes and forms, carbon pricing policies. But I'd just like to stress maybe one thing, not dwelling again on the tax aspect, but there is also the other component of the market, the carbon quotas, so to speak, which today trade at about €6 per ton, I think, in Europe, which is ridiculously low. probably this whole system was set up on the wrong foot. Probably too many quotas were issued at the time, but it's like time has come maybe to do something about it. And today it's just too easy and too cheap to buy tons of CO2 on that market, and the incentive is just not there. So, but back to your question, and as a final point, to me, carbon pricing policies, effective carbon pricing policies, are key to the challenges of climate change.
Thank you. Bjorn.
I ditto that. So you, David, said in your introduction that policies, having the right policies is important, and probably the most important policy is to introduce some way of carbon pricing. So we use carbon price internally, and when we do all our investments decisions in Statoil, regardless whether we have to pay the tax or not, just to stress test our investment and actually also help the project economics of energy efficiency projects or investments into long-term things. I know BP and probably Engie are doing the same. But we also, in some countries, actually pay the CO2 tax at around $50. And we know that, looking back, that has led us to do some really cool things within the carbon capture and storage. We have been willing to invest in technology development because we had the CO2 price. So I think getting a CO2 price is a very, very important part. Whether it comes as a form of a quota scheme or, but I think we need to continue to think around this, because we know that the market with the CO2 price is a very efficient way of allocating capital to get most, best solution for the money. And the challenge of transforming the energy systems of the world is a tremendous task. And there is not one government that could subsidize that. So I think in Brazil, you probably will need a system that allows you to work with forestry somehow, offset mechanisms, I don't know, and you will see local different markets, but some kind of pricing of CO2 is needed, I think.
The very famous sportsman, he used to play ice hockey, Wayne Gretzky, once said that when you are skating, it's not about getting to where the puck is, it's about getting to where the puck will be. And I think that's true of our industry as well. So based on the landscape that you see at the current point in time, with the caveat that one can never perfectly forecast the future, what are the sort of 2 or 3 things that you believe is going to be important for our industry to consider as we move forward? And I'm just going to go around the table and maybe start with Deputy Undersecretary Bayraktar.
Three things will shape the industry, or industry should think. I think, as we discussed, like a disruptive innovation, we should prepare ourselves, and the next game changer would be for energy. Definitely will be related to IT and energy, because it's converging already. And also, maybe one last thing I can add, we should approach all the issues in the industry like a more comprehensive way, and all parties, you said here, like a panel, regulators, policymakers, and industry get together. And I think the level of communication and better understanding each other is also quite important to see more comprehensive picture, because as a policymaker, we cannot only deal with just a matter of IRRs or like a basic decision on the investment, but also other aspects, social, economic, and other aspects of the issue. So more comprehensive thinking and approach, more integrative thinking, I think, will pave the way to move forward. And one last thing is this disruptive innovation age era, giving us to think and approach all the issue with flexibility, We are seeing this in the gas world, gas markets, and the paradigm and mindset is changing in gas field. So flexibility could be, or optionality, as you may say, would be the main thing in our future of energy. Thank you.
Thank you. General Director.
Three things. I see one thing related to technology, one to economics, and other to policies. First one is technology, how technology will impact the oil business, the oil recovery, the reserves, the speed of cost reduction in exploration, production, the disruptions that we never know and they just happen. The second one is the economics, the oil price and the energy price, how they will behave. This will determine company portfolio decisions and investments. And the third one is government decisions, government and regulators, how they will deal with climate change, how they will deal with the carbon. It will be carbon tax, will be mandates, will be both, will be none. I believe different countries will deal with it a different way. So I think these three things will determine our futures in terms of energy and how we deal with this Paris Agreement.
Thank you. Mark.
I definitely concur with my colleagues on the importance of innovation. If I could just pick a few examples. You mentioned the major disruption or the revolution of shale gas in the US, to a large extent due to the striking innovations on drilling technologies. And when you apply that to seismic developments and all that, it's probably also opening new ways of exploration in more conventional exploration, to revive some so-called sleeper plays in areas which we know today, but that we have not developed, that we can today look at, taking advantage of these new technologies. But innovation could also cover digital developments in our business and so on, but I won't dwell on that. Second one, I would say more gas. Okay, you would say that, but of course, as I mentioned, I have a gas DNA, but I still strongly believe that of all fossil fuels, this being the least harmful to the environment, there's going to be a push, and it is already happening, and it will continue. And last but not least, maybe the most important to me, if I could capture it as a corporate social responsibility overall, what we've been discussing today, to a large extent, becomes an increasingly important part of our license to operate. In many parts of the world where we are, we need to be doing all the right good things that we've been discussing today, and it's not going to be an option. And I would even add that this is also a key way, not only to operate, but also to attract and retain talents in our industry. The young graduates, the young talented engineers today may be wondering whether they want to join this industry, and we need to give them, an attractive proposition, and this social responsibility is definitely part of it.
Bjorn Otto.
Okay, so you asked for us for 3 points. I'm just going to go for one, and that is leadership. Nothing will decide this more than leadership. So this industry has a tremendous capability in history of driving innovation, achieving amazing things of scale, unprecedented outside of this industry. So it's up to leadership and you and me then to decide whether we use that capabilities of the industry to help shape the right and even better future.
Well, I think that's a terrific way to end this panel discussion. General Director Adone spoke about peak oil, and there was a great geologist, Bog Dickey, who once said, whenever we thought we were running out of ideas, we discovered we were running out of oil. But when we came up with ideas, we discovered more oil. And I think there is so much truth in that statement that actually the human imagination needs to continue to actually be expansive. Because, as my co-panelists have said, policy, innovation, economics, and leadership will be absolutely critical. But there are some practical matters of more renewables, more gas, that will be important alongside the need to serve those who are today underserved in their own economic development because they don't have the same access to energy. So it is often said we live in interesting times. We do. And thank you very much for listening, for being such a great audience, and very importantly, I would like you to join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you very much indeed.
ArcX is a collaboration project involving 6 universities, 4 research institutes and 8 oil companies in Norway. And our aim and goal is to understand the petroleum resources of the Arctic, how to develop the best possible technology that suits the Arctic, which has the least possible environmental impact. The research is mainly divided into 3. So 3 intertwined projects. One is to understand the Arctic geology.
We're dealing with petroleum geology and exploration of the Barents Shelf, so of course geology is a very crucial and important component. I've been working with several different projects and different aspects of sedimentation in Svalbard and the Barents Sea. But particularly I've been focusing on the Paleogene succession that were deposited 60 million years ago in what they call the central basin of Spitsbergen. So I think this basin is a good analog to some of the basins that you find along the western Barents Shelf margin.
Here you can see there's a layer in the rocks that is a bit darker here, and across the fault you see that this block here has gone down on the other side of the fault. Here you have a layer of sediments here that is thicker where the fault has moved down, so you had some space to deposit more sediments.
Of course, when it comes to exploration, having Svalbard as an uplifted part of the subsurface is very important, because then we can use this as an analog to the stratigraphy that the companies are working with in the southern part of the Barents Sea.
The other one is to understand the environmental impact of our activities.
We operate with ecosystem-based management in this region of the world, and that means it's a balance of protecting the environment but also utilizing the resources that exist there. And that is a big challenge, because you have to bring all the stakeholders to the table, you have to communicate the risks, and you have to come up with solutions and manage the future development activities. The final component is a focus on marine mammals, because marine mammals are at the top of the food web in the Arctic. They're very much associated with sea ice, so we have a very strong focus on marine mammals in the program.
Marine ecology is an important part of ArcX, because we want to work sustainable, and we need to understand the ecosystem. In case something happens, then we need to understand which consequences it can have for the ecosystem.
And the third is to develop the best possible eco-friendly technology that is suitable in these vulnerable areas.
We are taking part in other projects that use new technology to collect data and analyze data. So of course that's the link between kind of old school conventional geology, being out in the field, is easily combined with new technology.
We also do some technology projects where we develop drone technology for use in these areas, and that requires special infrastructure.
I use drones or unmanned aerial vehicles to look at marine mammals, more specifically whales. They fly in using waypoints, following a set path that we design in a computer with the help of Norut. And then every 3 or 4 seconds they take a picture, and then I look to see if there's a whale there or not, and look at the quality of that picture to see how certain I am and what are the light conditions. It's essentially to test how good these tools are, because the use of these systems is quite recent and has been developing really fast. So having this for marine mammals, it removes almost completely having the observation that you collect at sea and then goes away, that nobody else can look at that. So then you have a recording that several people can see, and you can remove what's so-called as the observer bias.
The biggest resource we have in a program like this is the group of young people.
We have a number of PhD students and postdocs based at universities, but they are also coupled to institutes.
What I'll be doing is that I will investigate the source rock properties of a specific period, the Triassic period, and also next year we plan to go to Svalbard and collect samples there as well. So I will also be collecting samples in Bjørnøya. And we'll correlate that with wells which have been drilled in the Barents Sea, and we can see how these properties of the source rock changes laterally, and then we can try to determine how the quality of the source rock is in terms of hydrocarbon potential.
We conduct many field expeditions and research expeditions, and it could be close by, or it could be trips that require the use of ships. And the University of Tromsø has a research vessel that we use for that. And then we have access to very good laboratories at several of the participating universities, but also industry partners help us with their laboratories. So all in all, it's a complicated mix of different infrastructure that helps us to conduct the research and give best possible results back to the participants. I don't know any other project which brings all of these activities together into one project like this. And also the sheer volume and size of this project is such that we will have an impact. It's an 8-year project involving many partners.
The cooperation between the academia, the government and the companies as cooperators is very unique in a Norwegian setting at least. And the size of the project and the diversity is also very unique.
It's a continuous process of improving the way we do things as new knowledge comes to the table.
By getting the communication going, we can actually also get good information back from authorities that we can use to improve our research programs. The ultimate delivery, I think, is that we would have been very useful for the authorities, for the oil companies, and for the research institutions and universities who are involved in the project. We will have educated about 30 PhD students and trained postdocs, and we will have published a set of good papers in the best journals.
Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research established this research center, which is the Petroleum Research Center, with the aim to make it a regionally recognized center of excellence in both upstream and downstream technologies.
The main purpose of this center actually is to serve the oil sector and to be the R&D arm of the petroleum industry in Kuwait.
It has a foundation. It is the first in the region. It was started in 1967 So it has a fairly amount of maturation.
The development of technologies in different areas is a continuous process. Why you develop every time? Because there is a need, there is a requirement, there is a way that you have to find a cost effectiveness technology, impress technology which can fulfill your requirement.
There is enormous challenges that the petroleum industry is facing. And those challenges definitely needs innovative answers.
We are concentrating on how to improve the reserved oil in the country, how we can probably develop technologies to improve the recovery.
In this center, we have 5 types of programs. Each program is focused in one area in the field. First program, we call it Enhance Oil Recovery. Enhance Oil Recovery means their work is totally with the upstream.
The reservoir is the more complex part of the earth geology. And as we go to deeper and more difficult oil, we need more understanding. This way we will enhance our capability of producing at lower costs.
If we develop a technology which has to do related to enhanced oil recovery, increasing the production, this technology, of course, can be used in any other country, in the GCC countries or in the world, based on how much effective is this technology.
Another 2 programs, we call one of them optimization refining processes, and we have refining capacity flexibility. These 2 programs under the downstream process.
This program particularly deals with the hydroprocessing. Hydroprocessing means you treat the petroleum fraction in presence of the catalyst and the hydrogen.
We have a number of patents related to the spent catalyst in which we try to develop a technology to recover the metals as well as to reuse this spent catalyst. This can be used everywhere if it is acceptable and then commercialized.
We are very good in catalysis monitoring. Also, we have now for producing the catalyst as well. We're preparing of the catalyst evaluation, and also we are doing it in our labs. We have here a unique lab. We call it pilot plant, which is simplified from the refinery.
We try to align our research activities with the requirement needed by KNPC, and at the same time having this facility which I'm talking now here is give us the opportunity, because this consider a small refinery which is mimicking the real refinery, operational 24 hours. So if we target a certain specific product, so we can make a full study, giving the results upon the completion of the results, giving it to the client, namely KNPC. There is a great potential to use it on the commercial units.
It's important because the refinery and all the technology are changing with the years, okay, in order to take account of the environment. But more you take account of the environment, you reduce the gain of the refinery. You have to maintain your gain respecting the environment. Because of this, we are developing this technology that they are taking account all these elements.
Petroleum refining, you are processing specific feedstock, but this feedstock's also properties is changing, so you need to develop catalyst. As the property changes, the sulfur content, for example, the sulfur content is increasing. So what technology that you have to use in order to reduce the sulfur, to be accepted worldwide, so the people, they can buy your commodity or your product, which is meeting the international standards. So the demand for technology development is always there.
Fourth one, which is the corrosion assessment and mitigation. And here it's falling into 2 areas, which is downstream and upstream, and to prevent any kind of failures happens in the future.
Cost of corrosion for the oil industry is in millions. Imagine a simple failure in a refinery, a crack in a vessel or a pipe or a reactor. It means for the refinery shutdown of a unit, and they take several days to change the damaged piece of equipment. So you lose production for several days.
The last one, which will be petrochemicals.
In our program, we are focused on enhancing the product properties, and we are focusing as well on trying to engineer high-performance polymers. In these two solutions, we can help the sector to be more competitive in comparison with the market and international market products.
There are many technologies worldwide, but which technology would suit the reservoir that you have? Imagine not only each country has its own oil properties, but each well, it has its own characteristics. So in this case, you have to really look into technology to produce what we call this type of crude oil, which is under category of non-conventional oil recovery. That's why we introduced the improved oil recovery, the enhanced oil recovery, to produce the heavier feedstock.
We're also responsible to have staff to be well-skilled and trained, Kuwaiti staff in particular, also having students from university, from public office or something like that. So we work collaboratively with those affiliation in order to end up with high caliber staff that can not only be used at Kisar but also in the oil sector.
We have to really be ready and confident in our research projects that we conduct, and also to be highly recognized and acknowledged for the science and technology and innovation, locally, regionally, and internationally.
I think the needs require such institute to exist, not only in Kuwait and the region, but all over the world, because energy is one of the main factors that impact sustainability.
We have a fantastic team, we have a marvelous equipment under one roof, so it is really a platform to start directional research in all kinds.
The vision is clear now. Based on this close relationship that we have, now it's getting more and clearer to us exactly where to focus and how to probably achieve these plans that we set.